Continuing where we left off last time, we have a nice little vector here that we've built out. We've done a little do loop to load it up and a little print thing here. But what happens if something went wrong? What happens if somehow we didn't get into here, or this loop was structured differently and you could actually not load it? You don't want to print something, and the size of 0 is still kind of weird. So what we might want to do is do something like this. We can test to see if it's empty. So if the names is empty, we know that we don't have any grades also. So we can come and say, you have an empty vector. Otherwise, guess what? We want to go ahead and print that sucker. So if the names is empty, print out an empty vector. Otherwise, print it out. Kind of a nice way of making sure we're being safe with something. And if someone says, "Hey, what if I want to remove something? The last person and the last grade really don't belong there." So let's do a little prompt. Reuse that character that I had there. Would you like to take off the last entry? So if the answer is yes, guess what we're going to do? Well, we have to be careful, of course. We need to make sure a couple other things, but I'll just show you the brief code on how to do it. So we can take grades and pop back the grade. We can take names and pop back the name. And that'll take the last entry off this thing. So our little for loop up here, we can do this again if we wanted to, and say, hey, here's how I take it off, here's how I get rid of one. But if you want to think about this a little bit more, we need to be a little more careful about this. So if you say yes, we have to make sure our size is at least 1. So we say, so if you say yes, and I'll just stick with names. So I have to have, hey, you wanted to take one off, my size is at least 1 or larger, then I'll pop it off and away we go. And that'll show us how to actually take something off if someone wants to remove something. So this gives you in two little examples here how to add stuff infinitely, basically, other than memory limitations and software limitations, and add and remove things without ever worrying about too much how big things are, with the exception of I don't want to pop something off. You could actually check, instead of size greater than or equal to 1, you could say, hey, is not empty. So check names.empty with an exclamation point on it. Is it not empty? Okay, then you can go take something off. Now some of you would be asking, well, we've been doing everything inside main. Can we do it in functions? Sure. We just come up here. Let's say we want to move our print function to a function. We want to pass in a vector, right? So it's a standard vector. And whatever type we want. Let's start off with a standard string. And then a standard vector again. With a double for the grades. And maybe an extra colon there. Just make sure it works. And that's the prototype of a function that'll allow us to pass in 2 vectors to make them all happy, happy, happy. So let's add in the names. Let's add in the grades. Let's go up here and do a little bit of copy pasta. And then we're going to come in here and call them print. We're going to pass in the names and the grades. And just to show you that the pop back actually works, I'm just going to copy this again. So after our pop back, since I know I'm going to put in at least 2, and let's run it. Into the name, Bob. Bob gets a 90. Yes, I've got more students. Jim. He gets an 80. Yeah, I'll put another one in. Let's put in Janet. She gets a 70. Just going downhill. No, I have no more students. And boom, there's Bob, Jim, and Janet all being passed into this function to print the names. Would I like to remove the last entry? Yes. And there's Bob and Jim, so Janet went away. So you can now start to see, I think, that you can pass functions and get information into them in terms of I want to print or manipulate or find stuff inside my vectors. And one last thing to cover with vectors is this. We've shown you how to print stuff out, but I have to tell you that vectors, when passed, pass like any other variable. This is a pass by value. Unlike an array, which automatically passes by reference, this passes by value. So if I wanted to write some function to, say, get names, so I go to my names function to get my names, I have to pass in a standard vector with a standard string, and I have to pass it by reference, just like we did before in all of your functions before. If you don't pass by reference, it will not change what's down there. So if I take this piece of code and I come all the way down here and I add it in, so I pass in my names, and then I'm going to come up here and strip out some other code. So there's my enter and my read. Drop that in here. I also need to get my temporary name because I don't need that up here anymore. Moving all the code. And then of course I need to get my pushback for my temp name here. So I get the V. So that now gives me a get names function that I can use inside my loop and just say get names and pass in names. So this will give me the ability to read in a vector of names through a function. I can do the same thing for get grades and everybody else. So we'll go down here. Here's Nick. Nick has a 55. No, I don't have any more. Would I like to remove the last entry? Yes. Boom. Nothing prints because there's nothing there. But you can see, I loaded Nick. If I didn't have the ampersand, if I take this ampersand out, and I come down here and I take this ampersand out, and I run this thing, and I put in Nick again, and it's 55, and I say no, I get an empty vector because names has nothing in it. You have to pass this thing by reference. Otherwise, it will not change the values. It will not change what this thing has inside of it. So with that, we've pretty well covered vectors. There's some more in the book. If you wanted to empty out a vector, there's a clear function, which says basically clear out the whole thing. You've got resize possibilities. If you go to cplusreference.com, you can look up all the functionality of a vector and all the things you can do. Anyway, hope you're having a great day. Keep coding.